There's a state of inner peace that separates those who react from those who respond. And today you'll discover why most people live their entire lives as prisoners of their own emotions, exploding at the smallest provocations, while a select few remain unmovable no matter what chaos surrounds them. Have you ever noticed how some people never lose their composure? Traffic jams don't rattle them. Rude comments slide off them like water off glass. Unexpected problems don't send them spiraling. They face the same irritations you do, the same disrespect, the same daily frustrations. But somehow they remain calm, centered, present. Meanwhile, you explode at your kids over spilled milk. You snap at your partner after a long day. A slow driver makes your blood boil. A colleague's comment ruins your entire afternoon. And the worst part? You know it's irrational. You know these things don't deserve that level of emotional energy. But you can't stop yourself. And you know what most people think when they see someone with perfect emotional control? They assume it's personality, natural temperament. Some people are just born calm, right? That person was blessed with good genes for emotional regulation. You've probably told yourself this exact story to explain why you can't achieve that same peace. That's the most dangerous lie you can believe. Because emotional mastery isn't genetic. It's not a personality trait you either have or don't have. It's a skill. And like any skill, it can be built systematically, one microscopic improvement at a time. In ancient Japan, there was a training method so effective that it transformed volatile warriors into masters of emotional control. Men who faced death daily without flinching. Samurai who could make life or death decisions with perfect clarity while chaos erupted around them. This wasn't about suppressing emotion or becoming cold. It was about something far more powerful. They called this state Fudōshin, the immovable mind. And when you understand how to build it, you stop being that person who apologizes after every outburst, who damages relationships with reactive behavior, who gives away their power to every minor irritation. You become someone others look at and wonder, how do they stay so calm? But here's what nobody tells you about emotional mastery. Building an unmovable mind doesn't happen through one dramatic shift or a weekend meditation retreat. It happens through a Japanese principle that weaponizes the smallest changes you can possibly make. Changes so minor your brain won't resist them. Changes that accumulate into total transformation. Before I show you this complete system, subscribe to the channel and leave a like below. And here's what I want you to do. Comment and tell me honestly, what situation makes you lose your emotional control most often? Is it traffic? Your boss? Family arguments? Your kids? Be specific. I want to know, because your answer will help me create content that serves you better. Every principle, every technique, every story I'm about to share is dedicated to everyone who's tired of being a slave to their emotional reactions. You deserve the peace you're seeking, and I'm grateful I can be part of your journey toward it. Thank you for trusting me with your time and attention. Now let's get into the content that will change how you experience every difficult moment for the rest of your life. Chapter 1. The man who couldn't stop exploding. David Martinez was 38 years old, a logistics coordinator for a mid-sized distribution company in Houston. Married to Elena for 12 years, father to 2 boys, ages 9 and 6. On paper, his life looked stable. Good job, decent salary, loving family, a modest house in the suburbs with a backyard where his kids played soccer on weekends. But inside David's head was a war zone. Every single day started the same way. The alarm clock at 5:45 a.m. already felt like an assault. He'd slam his hand down on it, irritation flooding his system before his eyes were fully open. The coffee maker took too long. The shower wasn't hot enough, then it was too hot. His oldest son left his backpack in the middle of the hallway again, and David would feel his jaw clench so hard his teeth ached. By the time he got in his car for the commute, he was already angry. And then came the traffic. Houston traffic, legendary for its ability to transform reasonable humans into rage machines. Someone cutting him off would send him into a verbal tirade, alone in his car, screaming at strangers who couldn't hear him. His hands would grip the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. His heart would pound. Sometimes he'd arrive at work genuinely exhausted from the emotional expenditure of a 40-minute drive. At the office it continued. A colleague asking a simple question felt like an interruption. His boss requesting a report revision felt like a personal attack. He'd respond with barely concealed hostility, a sharp tone that made people avoid him. By noon, he'd usually sent at least one email he'd regret, written in a state of irritation he couldn't control. But the real damage happened at home. One evening, his 6-year-old Miguel was taking too long to put on his shoes. They needed to leave for soccer practice, and David had asked 3 times. Miguel was distracted, playing with the laces instead of tying them. A completely normal thing for a 6-year-old to do. David felt the familiar heat rising in his chest. His breathing quickened. And then he exploded. "Miguel, how many times do I have to tell you? We're late. Why can't you just do one simple thing when I ask you? What's wrong with you?" The volume, the intensity, the words. Miguel's face crumpled. His small hands froze on the shoelaces. He started crying, not the dramatic crying of a tantrum, but the quiet, hurt crying of a child who doesn't understand why his father is so angry. Elena appeared in the doorway, her expression a mixture of disappointment and exhaustion. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. David saw it all in her eyes. "This again. When will you stop?" Miguel ran to his mother. David stood there, breathing hard, feeling the adrenaline still coursing through his body over shoelaces. Over nothing. This wasn't the first time. It wasn't even the 10th time. It was a pattern so established that his family had learned to navigate around his temper. His older son, Carlos, had become quiet and withdrawn. Miguel was developing anxiety. Elena had stopped trying to reason with him during his outbursts. She just waited for them to pass. David had tried to change before. Multiple times. 2 years ago he bought a meditation app. Used it for 4 days straight, then forgot about it. Last year he started going to the gym to blow off steam. That lasted 6 weeks before his schedule got too busy. He'd read books on anger management. He'd promised Elena 100 times that he'd be better, calmer, more patient. Every promise lasted a few days, maybe a week if he was really focused. But the pressure would build. The irritations would accumulate. And eventually, inevitably, he'd snap again. Bigger than before because he'd been suppressing it, trying to white-knuckle his way through frustration without any actual change in how his nervous system processed stress. He started to believe this was just who he was. A man with a short fuse. His father had been the same way. Maybe it was genetic. Maybe some people just couldn't change. The breaking point came on a Sunday morning 3 months ago. The family was having breakfast. A rare calm moment. Carlos accidentally knocked over his orange juice. It spilled across the table, splashing onto David's phone. David's hand moved before his brain engaged. He slammed his fist on the table so hard the plates jumped. "Are you kidding me? Can't you people do anything without making a mess? I can't have one peaceful morning in this house." Silence. Complete, terrible silence. Carlos, who was 12, looked at his father with something David had never seen before. Not fear. Not sadness. Disgust. His 12-year-old son was disgusted by him. Carlos spoke quietly. "You're always angry, Dad. About everything. We can't do anything right for you." Then he got up and left the table. Miguel followed him, still scared to be near David. Elena started cleaning up the juice without a word, her movements mechanical, defeated. David sat alone at the table, looking at the spilled orange juice, and something inside him finally broke. Not his temper this time. His denial. He couldn't live like this anymore. His family couldn't live like this anymore. Whatever he'd been trying wasn't working. He needed something completely different. That afternoon, while his family kept their distance, David searched online, how to stop being angry all the time. The usual results appeared. Therapy recommendations, anger management courses, breathing exercises. He'd seen it all before. Then he found something different. An article about a Japanese principle called Kaizen, continuous improvement through microscopic change. The article described emotional regulation not as a switch to flip, but as a skill to build gradually, 1% at a time. At the bottom of the article was a name, Dr. Kenji Tanaka, a psychologist in Houston who specialized in integrating Eastern philosophy with Western behavioral science. David called the next morning and made an appointment. Chapter 2, The Doctor Who Asked the Wrong Question. Dr. Kenji Tanaka's office didn't look like any therapist's office David had ever imagined. No couch. No degrees plastered across the walls. Just a simple room with 2 chairs facing each other, a low wooden table between them, and a window overlooking a small Japanese garden with carefully raked gravel and 3 precisely placed stones. Dr. Tanaka was in his mid-60s, gray hair, calm presence. He gestured for David to sit, then settled into his own chair with the kind of unhurried movement that somehow made David feel like he was moving too fast just by existing. "Tell me what brought you here, David." David launched into it. The anger, the outbursts, the damage to his family, the failed attempts at change. He spoke quickly, urgently, like he was racing against a timer. When he finished, he expected questions about his childhood, his relationship with his father, traumatic events. Instead, Dr. Tanaka asked something completely different. "When you get angry, where do you feel it first in your body?" David blinked. "What?" "The anger." Before you yell, before you slam your fist on the table, there's a physical sensation. Where does it start? David had never thought about it. I don't know. My chest, I guess? It feels hot. My heart speeds up. Good. And how long between that sensation in your chest and the moment you react? The yelling, the slamming? I don't know. Seconds? It just happens. Dr. Tanaka nodded slowly. That's your problem, David. Not the anger itself. The speed. You feel the sensation and immediately you obey it. There's no space between the stimulus and your response. You've trained yourself to react instantaneously. Train myself? I'm trying not to react. No, you're trying to suppress the reaction after it's already started. That's different. That's like trying to stop a car after it's already gone off the cliff. What you need is to learn how to observe the cliff before you drive off it. Dr. Tanaka stood and walked to a small shelf, pulling down a smooth river stone. He placed it on the table between them. In Japan, we have a concept called Fudōshin. Literally translated, it means immovable mind or immovable heart. It's the state of mental and emotional stability that remains constant regardless of external circumstances. A mind like this stone. The river flows over it, crashes against it, tries to move it. But the stone doesn't react. It doesn't fight the water. It simply remains. So I'm supposed to become emotionless? Like a stone? No. You're supposed to become unmoved by your emotions. There's a crucial difference. The stone still experiences the water. But it doesn't let the water determine what it does. You will still feel anger, David. But you won't let anger dictate your behavior. David felt skeptical. How? I've tried controlling my anger. It doesn't work. Because you're trying to control it. Control requires constant force, constant effort. I'm not teaching you control. I'm teaching you observation. And observation begins with one extremely simple practice. Dr. Tanaka leaned forward. For the next 2 weeks, I want you to do exactly one thing. When you feel anger arising, that heat in your chest, that acceleration of your heartbeat, I want you to notice it and silently name it. That's all. Just think to yourself, this is anger. Don't try to stop it. Don't try to calm down. Don't take deep breaths. Just notice it and name it. David stared at him. That's it? Just notice and name it? That's it. How is that going to help me stop yelling at my kids? It won't. Not in 2 weeks. But it will do something far more important. It will create a gap, a tiny space between the sensation and your reaction. Right now they're the same thing. You feel anger, you are anger. I'm teaching you to feel anger and be the observer of anger. Once you can observe it, you're no longer controlled by it. David wasn't convinced, but he'd come this far. Fine. Notice it and name it. For 2 weeks. Every single time. Even the small irritations. Especially the small irritations. Those are your training ground. The next morning, David woke to his alarm. Immediately, that familiar jolt of irritation. But this time, something was different. He remembered Dr. Tanaka's instruction. This is irritation. Just the thought created a strange effect. The irritation was still there, but he was somehow separate from it, watching it rather than being consumed by it. The sensation passed more quickly than usual. In traffic, someone cut him off. The heat rose in his chest. This is anger. He named it. The anger remained, but his grip on the steering wheel loosened slightly. He didn't scream. The silence in the car felt unfamiliar, almost uncomfortable. At work, his boss asked for report revisions. The familiar spike of defensiveness. This is defensiveness. This is irritation. He named it, and instead of sending a passive-aggressive email, he simply said, I'll have that to you by end of day. Small moments. Tiny victories. But something was happening. By day 5, David noticed he was catching the anger earlier, sometimes before it fully formed. The simple act of naming it seemed to slow everything down, creating that gap Dr. Tanaka had mentioned. One evening, Miguel was dragging his feet about homework. David felt the heat building. This is frustration. This is impatience. He named it, and in the space that opened up, he made a different choice. He knelt down next to Miguel instead of looming over him. Hey buddy, I know homework isn't fun. Let's tackle this together, okay? Miguel looked surprised. So did Elena, watching from the kitchen. After 2 weeks, David returned to Dr. Tanaka's office with an observation that confused him. I'm still getting angry. All the time. But somehow I'm yelling less. I don't understand how just naming it makes any difference. Dr. Tanaka smiled for the first time. You're discovering what neuroscientists have been studying for decades. Let me explain what's actually happening in your brain. He pulled out a simple diagram. When you experience an emotional trigger, your amygdala, the brain's alarm system, fires immediately. It sends your body into fight or flight mode within milliseconds. Your heart rate increases, stress hormones flood your system, and you're ready to react. This is automatic. You can't stop it. But when you name the emotion, you activate a completely different part of your brain, the prefrontal cortex. This is the region responsible for conscious thought, for observation, for decision-making. A neuroscientist at UCLA who studied this phenomenon for over 20 years found something remarkable. The simple act of labeling an emotion reduces the activation in the amygdala by up to 30%. Just by saying this is anger, you're literally dampening your brain's alarm system. David leaned forward. So I'm not imagining it. It actually works. It works. But here's what most people don't understand. This isn't about making the anger disappear. It's about changing your relationship with the anger. You're learning that you are not your emotions. You are the awareness that notices your emotions. And once you grasp that distinction, everything changes. So what's next? Next, we build on this foundation. You've created the gap. Now we learn what to do in that gap. And this is where we introduce the principle that will transform that tiny space into permanent change. We're going to apply Kaizen, continuous improvement, to your emotional responses. But first, you need to understand something critical about how sustainable change actually works. Dr. Tanaka picked up the stone again. This stone didn't become smooth in one day. The river didn't crash against it once and shape it. It took thousands of days, millions of small interactions with the water. Each one insignificant by itself. But accumulated over time, they transformed the stone completely. Your mind is the same. We're not looking for one dramatic breakthrough. We're building a new nervous system response, one tiny improvement at a time. 1% better at emotional regulation every single day. He set the stone down between them. You've proven you can notice anger and name it. That's your foundation. Now we add the next layer. For the next month, Dr. Tanaka gave David a new instruction. When he noticed and named the anger, he was to pause for exactly 3 seconds before responding. Not to calm down. Not to think of the right thing to say. Just to pause. Count to 3. Then respond however felt appropriate. 3 seconds. It seemed ridiculous. What could 3 seconds possibly accomplish? Everything, as it turned out. The first time David tried it was in the parking lot at work. Someone took the spot he'd been waiting for, the spot clearly indicated by his turn signal. The anger flared instantly. This is anger. 1, 2, 3. By the time he reached 3, the other driver was already out of their car, walking away. David pulled into another spot 20 feet away. The entire incident was over. No honking. No yelling. No ruined morning. That he sat in his car for a moment, genuinely shocked. The anger had been real. But it hadn't controlled him. At home, the 3-second pause transformed everything. Carlos spilled something. This is irritation. 1, 2, 3. It's okay, buddy. Grab a towel. Elena looked at him like he'd been replaced by a stranger. The old David would have made that spill into a 15-minute ordeal of shouting and resentment. After 3 weeks of consistent practice, something unexpected happened. David started catching himself before the anger fully formed. He'd feel the earliest hint of irritation, that first whisper of heat in his chest, and the naming would happen automatically. This is starting to be anger. The 3-second pause would activate without conscious effort. His body was learning a new pattern. Chapter 3. When the system gets tested. But then came Thanksgiving week. David's parents flew in from Phoenix. His father, Robert, was a man who'd never met a boundary he couldn't violate or an opinion he couldn't voice loudly. Within 2 hours of arriving, Robert had criticized David's lawn, his car, and his decision to let Miguel quit piano lessons. David felt the old familiar pressure building. Not the quick flash of irritation he'd learned to manage. This was deeper. Accumulated resentment from a lifetime of his father's judgment. This is anger. 1, 2, 3. He excused himself to the garage. In the garage, David stood among the tools and boxes, breathing. His hands were shaking slightly. The 3-second pause had worked, but he could feel the anger still there, coiled and waiting. He texted Dr. Tanaka, even though it was evening. The small stuff is working. But the big stuff, the deep stuff, I don't know if 3 seconds is enough. The response came 20 minutes later. Come in tomorrow morning. Early appointment. 7 a.m. The next morning, David sat in the familiar chair across from Dr. Tanaka. Tell me what you're feeling about your father's visit. Angry. Resentful. Like nothing I do will ever be good enough. Like I'm 12 years old again and he's pointing out everything wrong with my science project. And the 3-second pause isn't enough for that level of emotion. No, it's not. Dr. Tanaka nodded. Good. You've hit the limit of the first principle. This is exactly where we need to introduce the second layer. Do you know why the 3-second pause works for immediate irritations but not for deep resentment? Because the resentment is bigger? Because the resentment has roots. It's not a reaction to what's happening now. It's a reaction to what happened years ago, decades ago, layered upon itself. You can't pause your way out of that. You need something different. You need Niken. He wrote the characters on a piece of paper. Niken means introspection or seeing oneself with the mind's eye. It's a Japanese practice of self-reflection based on 3 questions. What have I received from this person? What have I given to this person? What troubles and difficulties have I caused this person? David frowned. How does that help with my father criticizing everything I do? Because right now, your mind is focused entirely on what your father has done to you. Every criticism, every judgment, every disappointment. Your anger feeds on that narrative. Niken doesn't erase what he's done, but it completes the picture. It forces you to see the full relationship, not just the parts that justify your anger. You want me to make excuses for him? No, I want you to see him completely. Not as a villain in your story, but as a full human being. Flawed, limited, doing his best with the tools he had. When you can see that, the anger loses its grip. Not because you've suppressed it, but because you've understood it. Dr. Tanaka leaned back. Tonight, I want you to spend 10 minutes reflecting on those 3 questions about your father. Write down your answers. Not what you wish the answers were. What they actually are. That night, after everyone was asleep, David sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. The questions felt impossible at first. What have I received from my father? David's hand hovered over the paper. His mind wanted to write, nothing but criticism. But Dr. Tanaka had said to be honest, complete. He forced himself to think beyond the anger that he received a roof over his head for 18 years. Food. Clothes. His father had worked 2 jobs when David was young so the family could stay afloat. He taught David how to change a tire, how to use basic tools, how to negotiate a salary. He'd driven David to baseball practice 3 times a week for 6 years, never missing a game. The list grew longer than David expected. None of it erased the criticism or the judgment. But it complicated the narrative. What have I given to my father? Distance. David realized he called his parents maybe once a month. Brief calls. Obligatory. He visited once a year, usually flying in and out as quickly as possible. He'd never asked his father about his life, his struggles, his regrets. He treated his father like an obstacle to endure rather than a person to know. What troubles have I caused him? David remembered dropping out of college after 1 semester, something his father had saved for years to afford. He remembered the years of minimal contact, the grandchildren his father barely knew because David kept them at arm's length. He remembered his father's attempts to connect, awkward and clumsy, that David had rejected as intrusive. By the time David finished writing, something had shifted. The anger wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something more complex, more human. Sadness maybe. Recognition of mutual failure. An understanding that his father was probably sitting in the guest room with his own resentments, his own story about a son who never appreciated him. The next morning, Robert made another critical comment, this time about the coffee being too weak. David felt the anger rising. This is anger. 1, 2, 3. But this time, in that pause, he remembered what he'd written the night before. The baseball games. The 2 jobs. The father who didn't know how to connect except through pointing out problems. Dad, David said quietly, would you like to go get coffee with me? There's a good place down the street. We could talk. Robert looked surprised. Sure. Yeah. That'd be good. In the car, David asked a question he'd never asked before. Dad, what was it like for you when I was growing up? I know you worked a lot. That must have been hard. Robert was quiet for a long moment. Then he started talking. About the pressure he felt to provide. About missing David's childhood because he was always working. About not knowing how to show affection except through trying to help David avoid mistakes. About his own father, who'd been even harsher, who'd taught him that love meant tough criticism. 2 hours later, they returned home. The resentment David had carried for 30 years hadn't disappeared, but it had loosened. He saw his father now not as the enemy, but as a man trapped in his own patterns, doing the best he could with the emotional tools he'd inherited. Elena noticed the change immediately. What happened with your dad? I asked him about his life. Actually listened. Turns out he's just a person, not a villain. Chapter 4. The practice becomes the person. Dr. Tanaka introduced the third principle during their next session. You've learned to notice and name the emotion. You've learned to pause. You've learned to see the complete picture through Nikken. Now we integrate all of it into a practice called Shugyo. It means training or discipline, but not in the Western sense of forcing yourself. Shugyo is about deliberate, consistent practice until the practice becomes indistinguishable from who you are. So I just keep doing what I'm doing. Yes, but with one addition. I want you to create a specific ritual, a daily practice that anchors everything you're learning. Every morning before anyone else wakes up, you'll spend 5 minutes in complete stillness. No meditation app. No guided breathing. Just sitting, noticing whatever arises. Thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. Notice them, name them, let them pass. This is your training ground for the rest of the day. David started waking at 5:30 a.m. 5 minutes of sitting in the living room before the house stirred. The first week felt pointless, uncomfortable. His mind raced. His body fidgeted. But by week 2 something was happening. The stillness in the morning created a kind of baseline calm that lasted throughout the day. The irritations still came, but they arose against a background of stability rather than chaos. A psychologist at Yale who's been studying mindfulness and emotional regulation for 16 years discovered that consistent morning practice, even just 5 minutes, fundamentally alters the brain's default mode network. The parts of your brain associated with self-referential thinking, the constant narrative of I, me, mine, become less dominant. You develop what she calls trait mindfulness, a stable capacity for present moment awareness that persists even when you're not actively practicing. 3 months into his work with Dr. Tanaka, David's family started commenting on the change. Not just the absence of outbursts, but his presence. He was actually there with them, listening, engaged, calm. Carlos, his 12-year-old, said it most directly one evening. Dad, you're different now. You're not scary anymore. The word hit David hard. Scary. His own son had been scared of him. And now wasn't 6 months after that first appointment with Dr. Tanaka. David was a different person. Not in the dramatic movie montage sense. In the quiet, undeniable sense that everyone around him could feel. Elena described it to her sister over the phone one evening. It's like living with someone who's actually present. He doesn't just hear the kids, he listens to them. He doesn't react to problems, he responds to them. I didn't realize how much tension I was carrying, always bracing for his next explosion, until I didn't have to anymore. At work, David's reputation shifted. His boss pulled him aside after a particularly stressful project deadline. I don't know what's changed with you, Martinez, but whatever it is, keep doing it. You used to be brilliant but volatile. Now you're brilliant and steady. That's the combination that moves people up. But the real test came 7 months in. David's company announced layoffs. 20% of the workforce. His department was being restructured. On a Tuesday afternoon, he was called into HR and told his position was being eliminated. Severance package. 2 months to find something new. Effective immediately. The old David would have spiraled. Rage at the unfairness, panic about money, shame about failure. The emotions would have consumed him, poisoned his family life, made the job search impossible. This David felt all those emotions. The anger came. The fear came. The shame came. But something else came with them. Space. Sitting in his car in the parking lot after clearing out his desk, David noticed what was happening in his body. This is fear. This is anger. This is shame. He named each one as it arose. Then he sat in the 5-minute stillness practice he'd been doing every morning for half a year. Right there in his car, in a parking lot, unemployed, the emotions didn't disappear. But they didn't control him. He observed them like weather passing through. After 10 minutes, he called Elena. I got laid off today. Oh God. Are you okay? Yeah, I actually am. It's going to be fine. We have savings. I have skills. This is just the next thing to handle. Elena was quiet for a moment. 6 months ago, this would have destroyed you. 6 months ago, I would have destroyed us. Not the layoff. My reaction to it. David used the job search as another training ground. Every rejection email was an opportunity to notice frustration and let it pass. Every promising lead that went nowhere was a chance to practice non-attachment. He found himself actually calm in interviews, present and clear, because he wasn't fighting his own nervous system anymore. He landed a better position within 5 weeks. Better pay, better culture, closer to home. But more importantly, he'd proven something to himself. The practices weren't just techniques he used when things were manageable. They were who he'd become. The unmovable mind wasn't about never facing storms. It was about remaining stable while the storms passed through. Dr. Tanaka called this stage Ri. In traditional Japanese teaching, there are 3 stages. Shu, where you follow the rules exactly. Ha, where you understand the principles behind the rules. And Ri, where the practice and the person become one. You're not someone who practices emotional regulation anymore, David. You are emotionally regulated. It's your nature now, not your effort. Chapter 5. The Philosophy of Everything. One evening, David's neighbor Marcus came over for a beer. They sat on the back porch watching their kids play. "I've got to ask you something," Marcus said. "What happened to you? You used to be, no offense, kind of an angry guy. Now you're like some kind of Zen master. Did you join a cult or something?" David laughed. "Not a cult. Just learned some things about how my brain works." "Seriously though, my marriage is struggling. I'm stressed all the time. I snap at my wife over nothing. I see you with Elena and your kids and it's different. How do you do it?" David thought about how to explain Kaizen, Fudōshin, Nikken, Shugyo. All the Japanese terms that had restructured his entire emotional life. But he realized Marcus didn't need the terminology. He needed the truth behind it. You want to know the real secret? It's not about never feeling anger or stress or frustration. It's about building a different relationship with those feelings. One tiny change at a time. Like what kind of change? Like noticing when you're angry and just naming it. That's it. Not trying to stop it. Just saying to yourself, this is anger. Do that for 2 weeks, every single time. Then we can talk about step 2. Marcus looked skeptical. That's it? Just notice it. That's it. Sounds too simple to work, right? That's exactly why it does work. Your brain won't resist something that small. 3 weeks later, Marcus texted him. "This noticing thing is actually doing something. I didn't yell at my wife once this week. That hasn't happened in months." David realized something profound. This system, these principles, they weren't just about anger management. They were about any area of life where you felt controlled rather than in control. Want to build a business but keep getting paralyzed by fear of failure? The same principles apply. Notice the fear. Name it. Create space between the fear and your response. Take one tiny action despite the fear. Build the practice until you become someone who acts despite fear rather than someone who's stopped by it. Want to learn an instrument but keep quitting when it gets difficult? Same system. Notice the frustration when you can't play a chord cleanly. Name it. Pause. Practice anyway. 1% improvement every day. Not trying to master the guitar in a month, but building the identity of a person who plays guitar, 1 5-minute session at a time. Want to improve your health but keep falling off diets? The pattern holds. Notice the craving. Name it. Create space. Make one slightly better choice. Not perfection. Just 1% better than yesterday. Kaizen applied to nutrition transforms your relationship with food the same way it transformed David's relationship with anger. The philosophy wasn't about emotional control. It was about human transformation. About becoming who you want to be through accumulated tiny changes that your nervous system accepts instead of resists. David's younger son, Miguel, now 7, had started having trouble with frustration at school. When he couldn't solve a math problem quickly, he'd shut down, give up, sometimes cry. One evening, David sat with him at the kitchen table. Miguel was struggling with subtraction, getting increasingly upset. "Miguel, can I teach you something that helped me a lot?" "What?" "When you feel frustrated like right now, try saying to yourself, this is frustration. Just notice it. You don't have to make it go away. Just notice it's there." Miguel looked at him skeptically, the same look David had given Dr. Tanaka. "That's weird, Dad." "I know. But try it anyway." Miguel went back to the math problem. David watched him start to get frustrated, then pause. His lips moved slightly. "This is frustration." Then he picked up his pencil again and tried a different approach. "It's still hard," Miguel said. "But it feels less bad when I say it." David felt something break open in his chest. Not anger this time. Gratitude. He was giving his son tools he'd never had. Miguel wouldn't grow up like David had, prisoner to every emotional wave. He'd grow up knowing he could observe the waves without being swept away by them. That's what this whole journey had really been about. Not just fixing David's anger. Breaking a generational pattern. Creating a different legacy. Chapter 6. What it really means. People started seeking David out. At work, colleagues would ask his advice on handling difficult clients or managing stress. Parents at his kids' school wanted to know how he stayed so calm during chaotic pickup times. Even strangers seemed to sense something different about him, a groundedness that stood out in a world of reactive chaos. David realized he'd become what he'd spent years resenting in others. That person who doesn't get rattled, who responds instead of reacts, who others look at and wonder how do they stay so calm. But here's what nobody saw. David still felt everything. The anger, the frustration, the fear, the irritation. All of it still arose. He hadn't become emotionless or detached or cold, that he'd become free. Free to feel without being controlled by what he felt. Free to choose his response rather than being hijacked by automatic reactions. Free to be present with his family instead of lost in emotional storms of his own creation. The practices had given him something more valuable than calm. They'd given him choice. And choice, he realized, was the foundation of everything else he wanted in life. Let me be direct with you now. No more story. No more narrative buffer. Just truth. You know exactly why you clicked on this video. You're tired of being controlled by your emotions. Tired of apologizing after outbursts. Tired of damaging relationships with people you love because you can't regulate yourself. Tired of feeling like a passenger in your own reactions, watching yourself do things you hate, unable to stop. And here's what you've been telling yourself. You're just wired this way. It's your personality. It's genetic. It's because of how you were raised, what you've been through, the stress you're under. Maybe you've even convinced yourself that passionate people are just more emotional, that your intensity is part of your authenticity. Those are lies. Comfortable lies that protect you from the uncomfortable truth. The real reason you can't control your emotional reactions isn't because you're incapable. It's because you've been trying to fight a war you can't win. You've been trying to suppress emotions, muscle through them, force yourself to stay calm through sheer willpower. That's like trying to stop a river by standing in front of it. The river always wins. What you've never been taught is that you don't need to stop the river. You need to learn how to let it flow past you without being swept away. But here's the part nobody wants to hear. Building that capacity requires something our culture has taught you to reject. Patience. Incremental progress. Daily practice with no immediate payoff. 1% improvement that feels invisible until 6 months later when you look back and don't recognize who you used to be. We live in a world that promises you 30-day transformations. Quick fixes. Life hacks. 5 simple tricks to never get angry again. And you've tried them all, haven't you? They worked for a week, maybe 2. Then you were right back where you started, except now with an added layer of shame because you failed again. You didn't fail because you're weak. You failed because you were sold a lie about how human transformation actually works. Your nervous system took decades to wire itself into these reactive patterns. Every time you've exploded in anger and then had the anger pass, your brain learned. Explosion equals relief. Every time you've avoided a difficult emotion and felt temporary comfort, your brain learned. Avoidance equals safety. These patterns are carved into your neural architecture like rivers carved into stone. And you're trying to change them with weekend workshops and motivational videos. David's transformation took 6 months of daily practice before it became stable. 6 months of waking up early. 6 months of noticing and naming emotions hundreds of times per day. 6 months of sitting in uncomfortable stillness when every part of him wanted to distract himself. 6 months of choosing the hard right thing over the easy wrong thing over and over and over. Most people won't do that. Most people will watch this video, feel inspired for about 48 hours, try the techniques once or twice, then drift back into their patterns when it gets difficult. A year later, David got an email from Dr. Tanaka. It was brief. How are things? David's response was longer. He talked about his new job, about his relationship with his kids, about Elena telling him last week that she felt like she was married to her best friend now instead of walking on eggshells around a ticking bomb. He talked about teaching Miguel the practices, about helping his neighbor Marcus save his marriage, about feeling at peace for the first time in his adult life. Dr. Tanaka's reply was even shorter. You did this, not me. You showed up every day when it would have been easier to quit. That's the only thing that ever works. Here's what David learned that you need to understand. The practices themselves, noticing emotions, naming them, pausing, reflecting through Niken, sitting in daily stillness, they're simple. Almost embarrassingly simple. That's not where the difficulty lives. The difficulty lives in doing them every single day when you don't feel like it. When you're tired. When you're stressed. When you've had a terrible day and just want to zone out in front of the TV. When your old patterns are screaming at you to give up this stupid experiment and just be who you've always been. That's where transformation happens. In those moments when you choose the practice over the pattern. Not once. Not 10 times. Hundreds of times. Thousands of times. Until the practice becomes automatic, woven into who you are. Dr. Tanaka had told David something in their final session that stuck with him. Most people want the result without the process. They want the unmovable mind without the 10,000 hours of noticing their mind move. They want to be the kind of person who stays calm in crisis without being the kind of person who practices staying present when nothing is happening. It doesn't work that way. It has never worked that way. Let me show you two versions of yourself that exist right now as possibilities. Version 1 is the person you'll be in 5 years if nothing changes. Still reactive. Still controlled by emotions you don't want to feel. Still damaging relationships and then hating yourself for it. Still trapped in the cycle of explosion and regret. 5 more years of the same patterns, getting deeper and more rigid, until your kids learn to avoid you, your partner learns to live around you, and you accept that this is just who you are. Version 2 is the person you'll be if you actually do this. Not try it. Do it. 5 years of daily practice. 5 years of 1% improvement. That person is calm in situations that would have destroyed the current you. That person has relationships built on trust instead of fear. That person looks at difficult emotions the way an experienced sailor looks at waves, with respect but not terror, knowing they'll pass. That person is free. The gap between those two versions isn't talent or genetics or luck. It's choice. Daily choice. Boring, unglamorous, invisible choice made over and over until the choices become who you are. So here's my question for you, and I want you to answer honestly, at least to yourself. Are you actually willing to do this? Not in theory. In practice. Are you willing to wake up earlier to sit in stillness? Are you willing to notice and name your emotions 50 times a day for months? Are you willing to feel awkward and uncertain and like you're not making progress while your brain slowly rewires itself? Because if you're not, that's fine. Really. Close this video. Go back to looking for the quick fix that doesn't exist. No judgment. But if you're genuinely willing to walk this path, then I need you to do something right now that matters. Don't just watch this video and move on. Make a public commitment. Not to me. To yourself and to the other people watching this who are on the same journey. Subscribe to this channel. Not because I need subscribers, but because you need the reminder that this is an ongoing practice. You need the next video that reinforces these principles when your motivation fades in 2 weeks. Leave a comment right now. Tell me specifically what emotional pattern you're going to change using these principles. Be specific. Not, I want to be calmer. Say, I'm going to stop yelling at my kids when they move too slowly in the morning, or, I'm going to stop sending passive-aggressive emails when I'm frustrated at work. Specificity creates accountability. Tell me you'll check back in 2 weeks and report what you noticed. Because when you make that public statement, when you put it in writing where others can see it, you've just increased your chances of actually doing it by 300%. This is where most people bail. They've consumed the content, felt the inspiration, and now they want to move on to the next video, the next hit of motivation. Don't be most people. The transformation you want is available. The path is clear. The practices work. The only question is whether you're willing to walk it. David was just a regular guy who couldn't stop exploding at his family. No special advantages. No natural calm. No privileged upbringing. Just a guy who hit bottom and decided to do something different. One tiny practice at a time. One day at a time. For 6 months. Then a year. Then forever, because the practices weren't a temporary fix. They became his life. You can be that person. The only thing standing between current you and transformed you is 6 months of unglamorous daily practice that nobody will notice until suddenly everyone notices. The path is waiting. It's been waiting for centuries. Fudōshin isn't new. Kaizen isn't new. Nikan isn't new. They're ancient because they work. Not quickly. Not easily. But completely. Now stop consuming and start doing. Here's exactly what you do. Not tomorrow. Right now. Today. First, commit to the 2-week foundation. For the next 14 days, your only job is to notice and name your emotions. Every single time you feel anger, frustration, irritation, anxiety, impatience, notice it and silently say to yourself what it is. This is anger. This is frustration. This is impatience. Nothing else. Don't try to stop the emotion. Don't try to calm yourself down. Just notice and name. Set a reminder on your phone for morning and evening that says one word. Notice. That's your anchor. Second, add the 3-second pause on day 15. Once you've proven to yourself that you can notice emotions consistently, add the pause. When you feel the emotion and name it, count to 3 before responding. Not 3 seconds to suppress your reaction. 3 seconds to create space between stimulus and response. 3 seconds where you remember you have a choice. Do this for another 2 weeks. Third, establish your morning stillness practice on day 30. 5 minutes. That's all. Before anyone else in your house wakes up, before you check your phone, before coffee, sit somewhere quiet and just be present. Notice whatever arises. Thoughts, emotions, physical sensations. Name them. Let them pass. This becomes your daily training ground for everything else. Fourth, when you're ready, add an icon reflection. Once a week, spend 10 minutes writing answers to those 3 questions about someone you have difficult feelings toward. What have I received from this person? What have I given to this person? What troubles have I caused them? Start with whoever triggers your strongest reactions. This practice will change how you see every difficult relationship in your life. Fifth, protect the practice like your life depends on it. Because your relationships do. Your peace does. Your freedom does. When you travel, the practice travels. When you're sick, you do a smaller version. When you're stressed, that's when you need it most. No gaps. No exceptions. No negotiations. The practice continues because that's who you are now. The question isn't whether this system works. Thousands of years of Japanese wisdom plus modern neuroscience confirms it works. The question is whether you'll actually implement it with the consistency required for your nervous system to change. David was nobody special. Just a guy who got tired enough of his own patterns to actually do something different. He didn't transform in a week or a month. He transformed over 6 months of boring, repetitive, unglamorous daily practice. And now he's free in ways he didn't know were possible. You can have that same freedom. But you have to stop looking for shortcuts and start walking the path. If you've made it to the end of this video, you're already different from 99% of people. Most people would have clicked away 10 minutes ago. You stayed. That tells me something about you. You're genuinely looking for change, not just entertainment. Subscribe to this channel right now and turn on notifications. I create content like this weekly, and you'll need the reinforcement when your motivation fades. Because it will fade. Motivation always fades. That's when the practice becomes crucial. Leave your commitment in the comments. Be specific about what pattern you're changing and when you'll check back in. That public declaration matters more than you think. If you want to go deeper into Japanese philosophy and practical systems for transformation, I have another channel dedicated entirely to these concepts. You'll find the link in the description. Smaller community but deeply committed people who are actually doing the work. Thank you for your time and attention. Thank you for being someone who watches to the end instead of just skimming for quick answers. That quality, that willingness to go deep, is exactly what this transformation requires. The unmovable mind is waiting for you. Not in some distant future. 6 months from now. Maybe less if you're consistent. Maybe more if you're not. But it's there, available, proven. Now close this video and take the first action. Notice the next emotion that arises. Name it. Create that tiny gap of awareness. That's where everything begins. See you in the next video. And remember, the practice isn't about perfection. It's about showing up. Every day. No matter what. Now go build the life you actually want to live.